Hi, everybody, and welcome to Words, Images, and Worlds. I am glad to be talking with Paul Fricke on this episode. Paul, you're a comics creator, teacher, you've been a storyboard artist. I believe you've done work in picture books as well. So all around a creator, educator kind of person. Are there other verbs that you want to use to describe yourself?
Oh, I guess I'm a family man.
Mm-hmm.
Wife, two grown daughters, and we all have a creative bent. And I also have been into music since I was a kid and songwriting since I was in my teens. That's something I do on my own, and but that covers it, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and you podcast as well. So podcasting is part of that.
Oh, I suppose so. Thanks for catching that. Yeah, I've been doing an Alex Toth in-depth podcast for a few years, and I thought maybe it would scratch the itch and make it a little easier for people to take me bringing up Toth all the time in the classroom, but it just seems to have fed the obsession instead. So
Yeah,
there's no cure for me on that score.
yeah. I love Toth, and I love how that style kind of leads into Bruce Tim, and I mean that kind of takes us to a little bit of our conversation too, because you worked in kind of that animated style with The Fly in particular. It kind of carries that kind of look and feel to it in a way.
It does, and um, uh, inking the Fly, I was working with writer Len Straczewski
Hmm.
and editor Brian Augustin, who had been part of how I got my start in comics, self-publishing Troll Lords, co-created with Scott Biederstadt, and so it was fun to reunite with those guys, and then to join along with Mike when we were working on The Fly. Mike and I had many conversations, and even before that, I inked a few pieces at DC with him prior to The Fly, and Mike's the one guy that I had to add stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I had that Toth mindset where whoever I inked, I tried to simplify and streamline and
Hmm.
clean up. And with Mike, his pencils were all there, but also they were kind of open, and he would encourage me and other inkers to add to it. But Mike and I talked about, I would say his favorites uh, were John Byrne, Jaime Hernandez,
Hmm.
and then Toth. And then when we were working on The Fly, he talked a lot also about John Romita Sr. And noses, Romita noses, and all
Oh
that
yeah.
stuff. But we just had a blast on that series, um, and we did discuss that stuff. There were many times inking that I thought of Toth in his pencils while I was doing it, uh, and that did carry through from that influence, no doubt.
Yeah. I loved Mike's stuff on the Batman adventures in particular. That just had a unique appeal and a unique vision, and definitely kind of lined up with that style. And he was a person gone too soon, from what I understand.
Yeah, Mike, before he started working on Batman Adventures, was just a freak for the show.
Hmm.
So when we would talk regularly, he would just gush about the show. Did you see this one? What about that? And he would go into the storytelling and the movement and all that stuff. So when he got the gig, he was so excited, and I thought a great fit for him too. Uh, he was basically discovered for comics by Brian Augustin, and I may as well talk about this a little bit. The first comics job that Mike ever did was a framing sequence for a literacy book called Quest for Dreams Lost.
Oh wow, yeah.
So we were publishing Troll Lords, and then we met somebody who was heavily involved in the mid late '80s in Chicago, named George Hagenauer,
Hmm.
who was putting events together and raising funds. And then Brian came up with this idea to raise funds uh, for that literacy program with a comic book. And we had already met Mike through other connections in Chicago, and that's his first published stuff. So we knew Mike from fairly early on when when Troll Lords was published. And then and then when Brian got to DC, he wanted to tap Mike. And I would say that what you saw in the industry at that time was, Golden and Art Adams and Image influenced. My style was not that. And I think Brian picked out a lot of artists like Mike Parobeck and Mike Waringo and Humberto Ramos and others that I think went to that creative, that simpler sensibility. And the perfect fit then for Mike to do Batman Adventures. I'm just really glad before he passed that he had that run.
Yeah.
Because I think he felt like his style was not in and wasn't the flavor of the month, and he wondered if he was going to get work. And then he had that run. I wish I had inked that, but Rick Burchett did such a great job on it. It's hard to fault it. That's for sure. But yeah, Mike was diagnosed with diabetes and handled it and managed it, and then less so. Some of that had to do with how the comics career was going too, and that was a emotional time for me because my wife had given birth to our first daughter, and Mike died the same day or the day after.
Oh, wow.
So I was like driving in to visit my wife and the baby, and then driving back. And I was calling that night at home people about the birth, and then Dan Jurgens called from San Diego to tell me the news. Other people had been trying that day to get through to me to tell me, but virtually it happened the same day. So for me, it was just, I was a mess. I'm driving to the hospital, and I'm crying. I'm seeing Mike I'm crying in my cereal, and while I'm vacuuming and picking up the baby, and it's hopeful and it's all sad, and it was all balled up. So I was jelly for a while, and but very kind of Dan and others to keep me in mind. Then I miss him. I miss him even after all these years.
Oh yeah. Well, and I was going to ask about positive collaborations, positive interactions, in the industry and the medium. So any other names that you want to throw out there as being just particularly decent and good people that you've worked with over the years?
Yeah, I mean, the Troll Lords thing was important because we kind of created a bunch of careers from self-publishing that book. And I would say there was a different alchemy to how that went. I don't think Troll Lords is something that I would have done on my own, or Scott would have, or Brian would have, or whatever, but it became a thing because of the collaboration. Beyond that, and Mike, I really enjoyed inking over Stephen DeStefano on Amazing Man, and we did a Plastic Man short story, Secret Origin of Plastic Man. That was a lot of fun. Actually, once I exited the comics industry and went into other work, it took some time, but I realized that my wife, who was also an artist, probably has collaborated more with me than anybody else. Sometimes she would pencil stuff that I would ink, but more often she would be working on colors with me. I'm almost on just tons of jobs that we did over the years through our Blue Moon Studios, our freelance illustration company. And so, lately, what I've been working on is a comic that's available online. It's called Blood Orange, and it's available at newdaynoir.com. There's 7 chapters up now, and I've got 20, 30 more pages done. So new chapters will be rolling out again. But Tim Avers and I worked out a collaborative system or dynamic that really works well for me.
Nice.
And it's born out of how I think comics should function and what that process should be. So I've got particular things that I don't want in a script, and how I want him to feed me what we call a script, and then I can write with him visually while we're doing it. So it's been very, very satisfying, and I'm looking forward to doing more. And eventually, that will be probably over 200-page graphic novel that we'll collect.
Nice, nice. I'll be sure and link the website when I share this as well.
Cool.
Yeah, yeah. So you've also mentioned literacy and working with Mike in that regard, but any other areas of the way that comics and literacy have sort of grown together? Because comics has this uh unfair reputation going back of being something that's kind of kids stuff, not as complex. And so one of the messages that I like to share on this show, among others, when I'm talking with a range of people, is
Mhm.
actually no, comics can be pretty complex and literacy can be woven in and explored. And it is woven in and explored through the words and images. So anything on that you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, anybody who's into comics and took it seriously, and by my mid-teens, I was, you
Hmm.
know, I was looking at what was self-published. I was reading Will Eisner and Discovering the Spirit, and then reading his books. This predates McCloud and Understanding Comics and all that. And
Hmm. Hmm.
so I've been thinking about it a while. And anybody who's grown up reading comics during that period has a chip on their shoulder about how comics are maligned and so on. And I would say during that period, I just always was hoping that it would be taken more seriously as a legitimate medium or an art form. And I would say as a kid that I developed a vocabulary and a love for reading through comics. So, but I would make the distinction. I don't think comics are just a bridge to real reading.
Agreed, agreed. Yeah.
And I think some people still, I'll take that, right? Because we had booksellers and librarians and educators, middle school and high school teachers that just wouldn't accept comics. And somehow
Hmm.
picture books is legitimate and it's for kids and that's looked up to and that's fine. And prose is great, but you put those two together in a different way or a different format and suddenly it's
Yeah.
garbage. And so it's been really nice over the last decades to see that develop where, um, you know, and some of that is the influence of Scott's book,
Hmm.
um, and more outreach by other people and so on, but and other graphic novels that have come out, right? So they are
Hmm.
regularly taught. My daughters took, were exposed to and read graphic novels at their high school here in Minnesota, and libraries. I've just read tons of articles and looked at some data that libraries, the graphic novel sections in there have the highest traffic
Oh yeah,
or highest
absolutely.
traffic. So they're just great developments across the board.
Hmm.
And, I just I hope that more people will be exposed to it or take it in and and take it for what it is. It is a magical kind of interactive medium where people read words and pictures.
Hmm.
We're reading the pictures too, and people aren't always thinking that. There's too many. There's a whole bunch of people I've talked to over the years. When they're reading comics, they think they're just going from balloon to balloon, and it just sometimes you can get trapped in that and
Yeah.
go too fast. That certainly it can happen, but I think people are taking in images a lot faster than they think they are,
Uh-huh.
and in a millisecond, and it happens quickly. And there's this back and forth kind of thing that's going on, and
Yeah.
what happens between panels and all. It's a great medium, and it's an immediate thing because you can almost feel like when you're reading it a connection with the creator or creators.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
it's just really nice to see that embraced more. But of course, I'd like it to explode and be even bigger. So
Same, same.
yeah, but what a great tool and what a great medium in its own right. Um,
Hmm.
read, read, read.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is the thing. And you've also worked in sort of the education side of comics as well. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah. Since early in my career, I would appear at uh, schools and look at portfolios at conventions, and I just always liked it.
Hmm.
And even though um, even though I worked in freelance illustration for a long time, I kept my head in comics. I would do a lot of comics outside of the industry, And I kept in mind, a couple things. One is that, and I'll get to the MCAD and the teaching thing in a sec, but
Yeah,
the,
yeah.
I saw a whole bunch of stuff in advertising where people would try to do comic stuff and they would get so many things wrong. The art wouldn't be so great. They didn't understand how comics worked. So it was really fun I'm like, if you're going to do a comic book thing, I know comics, so let's make it look like a real thing and have it work. And I kept in mind Eisner, when he stopped the Spirit, he did a lot of educational comics. He did comics about taxes, and then and with the military magazine and so on. It can be a teaching thing as well. So I kept that in mind, and for several years, Barb Schultz at MCAD, Minneapolis College of Art and Design, where they have probably the longest running comics 4-year degree program in the country, if memory serves. And she was after me to teach, and the timing didn't work. Kids were at the right age. I was making good money storyboarding and commercial stuff, and then the timing became perfect. So I've been teaching at the comics department as an adjunct professor there for almost 12 years now, and I'm a pig in slop. I just love it. So it's kind of weird, right? To be to hit like 9 years old or 12 years old and then say, I want to be an artist and I want to have a comics career, and I just want to be involved in doing something with art and comics my whole life, and one way or another, through ups and downs and a lot of changes and adapts, I've been able to keep carving that out. So
it's awesome.
I probably am happier at MCAD right now than I've ever been. The program is growing, probably twice as large as it was 7 years ago. It's one of the more popular majors at MCAD, and most students are coming in reading webtoons and manga, or they become comics majors when they get there and they take intro to comics and they go, what? And they love it. So some are diehards and see who's graduating from MCAD and going, oh, I want to go there too. Or they just love comics, and then they find, oh, there's a school for this, great. Or we convert them once they're there. So I just couldn't be happier when I prepare classes, because I've loved dissecting this stuff for 45 years. And now I get to further develop those notions or present it or work with students to see what new things they'll bring to it. So fun.
Yeah. Well, and you get to pay tribute to so many people as you teach about the history and the work in comics, and then you also get to share your work and kind of live in people's minds. So it's a very cool thing.
Yeah, I'm pretty passionate about it, and I think the students can sense that. So we have a nice back and forth about that. Sometimes we'll do, in comic storytelling this semester, we just did 2-hour sessions discussing deep notions about comics, how it works on the page, a variety of things. And I think we could have gone on longer in those sessions. So, again, because students are coming in and they're younger than my kids now, I've held up Trollord's pages and other pages I've done in front of the class, and realized even the first year I was teaching that those pages were older than anyone in the class. So while they're coming in, being aware of webtoons and manga and some other current stuff, YA graphic novels, I do think it's important to make the connections for them, with them, about what was being done by, Winsor McKay and Frank King and so on in comic strips over 100 years ago. Bringing up Toth and Kriegstein and Kurtzman and newer practitioners. I try to make sure, I don't want to inundate that because we don't want to live in the past, but there is some fresh, vital stuff, and it's important to know the history and say, oh, you don't know what can be done in comics? Look at what Little Nemo what was done in Little Nemo all those years ago. It's just a
Mhm.
treasure trove. So I try to connect those threads of who influenced who throughout comics history, and
Yeah.
then who's bringing something new to the medium as we go forward.
Yeah, I love that. And, just thinking about teaching and sharing ideas and the importance of citations, the importance of like noting those foundations, like all of this comes from somewhere. So it's nice to trace that back and to just note those names and places and ways that the medium has come to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not just a matter of history either, although some of that is important, but to see the through lines about how styles and approaches evolve. Uh,
Hmm.
and the trick with all that, and I talk a lot about this with the Alex Toth in-depth show, which is a podcast and a video show on YouTube. So
And we'll
uh,
link it as well.
yeah, I record that like long form and audio only, just so even though we're discussing visual things, I like to make sure that it'll play if we're just talking about it. And then with assistance, we augment the video, the
Mhm.
audio with video and images to kind of support what's being discussed. So that's kind of labor of love, but that's the kind of thing that I like to do as well. That's another way to grow the medium and get people to think, as much as we can be influenced by others, it's still important that while you want to be informed by what has gone before and be aware of it, you want to filter all that through and then find your unique voice, because ultimately, no matter what you're doing and how much you develop draftsmanship or whatever else, ultimately what sets you apart is your own unique experiences and your own unique line, and
Oh,
how you put that down. So
yeah, yeah, absolutely. We stand on the shoulders of those that came before and sometimes do things a little differently. But I mean, it's still different than
mhm.
somebody else did it, which is important.
Yeah, I always thought it was funny. My daughters would be something would come up, a pop culture reference. I'd be discussing Citizen Kane, or I'd throw a line out, or whatever else. And a lot of times, my daughters knew what all that stuff was, or they were
Uh-huh.
aware, or they'd watch a movie like Misery or something. It's like almost everything they knew, other than what they got from my wife or myself, was from Family Guy or Simpsons. So
Yeah.
people can be aware of what's going on, or be kind of clueless of what even has gone before. And I think it's important to acknowledge those things and know where they came from and go to the source as much as possible.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
uh, I it's hard for me to figure out how you proceed without knowing that
Mhm.
stuff. Um, so I think it's important too.
Yeah. Well, and you feel like you're on the inside track and there's a richness to that. And I feel like, I mean, on the surface, you can appreciate something like in The Simpsons or something like that. That's funny. But then to me, it makes it even funnier when you realize kind of what they're playing with and the stories that they're reconceptualizing. I mean,
Yeah,
that just adds enjoyment to it.
yeah, that's the way it's designed. It's supposed to be a reference that you're supposed to get from the thing, but people have been watching these things for decades without knowing the source or the context.
Yeah.
I guess it's still funny, but it is a lot funnier if you know what's going on. But just being aware of what's gone before, it's like,
Hmm.
oh, look at this new thing I came up with, and I'm like, well, Springsteen did that before, so
Yeah,
um, just be aware,
absolutely.
and then do
Absolutely.
your own spin.
That's right. So I also mentioned a little bit earlier, and we could talk a little bit about this if you want. You have done work in picture books as well as storyboards. Anything that you'd like to share about from those worlds that connect with what we've said so far?
Oh yeah, I mean, the picture book stuff. I just did one big book for them um, in the early '90s called "Look and Find Scary Monsters,"
Hmm.
and in some ways it was against the grain for me because it isn't narrative really, and you just have to make it busy and hide people in them. But it was a blast to do. I worked for like 3 months on that, 11 to 17-hour days. I was inking The Fly at the same time, and it was just a very busy time. But it kind of got me a taste of work outside of comics, and it scratched the itch. I think after some years of doing comics, like almost 10 years, I realized the comics I wanted to do the most, I probably wasn't going to make much money at. And comics were a lot of work for less money. I made okay living inking for DC, but ultimately I'd already co-created and self-published my own book, and that was successful. And then I had a good run at DC, and I was like, you know what? For some reason, I'm not as satisfied as I thought I'd be. It kind of did it already, and I flipped the and started doing less work for more money. And I think the kind of work I was doing in illustration also fit my temperament in terms of schedules and sizes of jobs and all that. So again, I did a lot of educational comics, history comics about the Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe. I did work with the CDC and the Census Bureau. So there was a lot of big, the National Kidney Foundation. So in all those projects, we used comics and superheroes in different genres to get that message out. While doing all that work for years, storyboard work was mostly commercial storyboard work for broadcast commercials. So I did a lot of work for Pillsbury and drew the Doughboy a lot, which was partially co-created by Marty Nodell, who had a hand in creating the original Green Lantern.
Oh, wow.
Leo Burnett, I think, in Chicago when that was done, and he was a sweetie too. I did conventions next to him and his wife, and they were great.
Cool.
But I just look for ways to apply that stuff as much as possible, and I found that in doing storyboard work, the training you need to do storyboards you get from comics. So all the things I needed to do in terms of drawing out of your head and drawing everything and storytelling and drawing fast, that's all stuff you have to develop. So when I'm talking to students now, I'm like, if you're reticent to take comics as a major, I would really strongly recommend it, because you're learning a variety of skills that can be applied in a lot of different ways to get work in different ways. And then while I'm doing all that work for those decades, I just tried to keep my hand in. My heart was still with comics, and I worked away at my own picture book called Night of the Bedbugs, which was finally and eventually published by Jim Valentino's Silver Line at Image, and that was a lot of fun too, because that's a comic book. It's a picture book, but it's just a comic with a hardcover. So I like to keep my hand in with different projects over the years, and Blood Orange is that thing right now. Did that answer the question?
I believe so. I believe that is, yeah. So I mentioned that I would link to Blood Orange, the podcast, any other spaces online that you want to share about, or upcoming events and things like that you want to mention.
I think I'll be at a convention in Minneapolis in October, FallCon, so people can look for that. As more Blood Orange is rolled out, Tim and I are talking about getting to some other cities with perhaps a half of the book, like a preview printed. So we'll see if that comes to fruition. Otherwise, online, I mean, I'm on Facebook, I suppose, but the Instagram is the place to find me, either Prof. Paul Comics with an X at the end, where I just ruminate about comics in general and share student work. Alex Toth in Depth on Instagram. I post near daily some curated stuff of Toth. And then my Instagram is Opaulo Art, I believe. And I'm just posting images up there all the time. So I'm fairly active on Instagram more than any other right now.
Awesome. Yeah. I enjoy it as a visual way of connecting too.
Yeah, I mean, you can find bad pockets in any social media.
Sure.
But I tend to try to focus on positivity when I'm on any platform. And if you're putting that out there, that tends to be what your feed becomes more and more. So for some reason that reminds me of the Beatles. Love you make, love you take, that kind of deal.
That's
So
right. Use
yeah,
the algorithms for good, not evil.
that's right. That's quite right. Yeah, but I would hope that people would check out Blood Orange. New Day Noir is a specific thing that we've chosen to put this out as, and I think it's kind of a new twist on an old genre. And it is a current comic about fashion and business and celebrity and crime, and it's a different kind of thing. I hope people will check it out and like it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be sure and link to it. I appreciate your work. I appreciate your time. I'm glad to talk to you anytime about Toth or anything else for a part two. So we may have to plan that at some point.
I'd be happy to. As you know, because of the show or in general and a previous blog, I can go on about Toth for a long, long time. So great to connect here, and be happy to do it again.
Yeah, sounds great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. Take care.
You too.